Now. Okay, let's start. Welcome everybody. This is one of the events that North Africa Initiative and the Foreign Policy Institute at SAIS is organizing. The topic or the focus of today is China and its role in North Africa. Most of those who are China watchers know that China is expanding its presence across Africa. But also North Africa in particular. We'd like to look into. I mean, it has both bilateral and multilateral partnerships, specifically with Morocco, with Tunisia, Algeria, of course, is a big player there. It's also, I think, now starting to enter into Libya, even though the political situation is still not very stable. This is, apart from its expansion throughout Africa. The question we have is to have a little bit of background on China's presence in this region, and why is it interested in this region specifically, and how is it presenting itself as the more reliable partner than the United States or Europe, which were the traditional allies or traditional trading partners for this part of the world. Also to talk a little bit about the marine Silk Road sort of side of the Silk Road that goes through North Africa, I think Egypt specifically, across the Med. So without delaying this, our main speaker today is Dr. Mordechai, who's joining us from Israel today, who did extensive research on this. And I'm going to start with him. Let me just one housekeeping thing. Those who are joining us on Zoom, please send any questions you have through the chat function, without raising your hands. We will take some questions from the room here specifically, and then we'll ask some of the questions that are on Zoom, and hopefully we'll keep it in time without actually any delays. Dr. Mordechai, welcome to SAIS. Thank you for joining us. I know it's a little bit late for you. It's about 8 o'clock, I think, over there.
7.
7, okay. So please go ahead.
Okay, I want to share my presentation. Okay. Hello to everyone. The study examined the place of the Maghreb region in China's BRI grand strategy. China ultimate strategic pursuit of grand strategy mainly aimed to place China back in the center of the world and reach a basic strategic balance with the West. The BRI is designed to reshape China economic geographic by promoting connectivity with oversized markets, placing China in the center of the Eurasian logistic network and making Beijing two-ocean country, boarding the Pacific Ocean and the Indian Ocean. In broader sense, the BRI seeks to reshape China's international surrounding activity rather than adopting them passively as before. The BRI play a key role in fulfilling the Chinese dream and strengthening the Communist Party of leaderships. This assertive foreign policy deletes this ambition initiative countered by weakening West power influence in the BRI countries and challenging its global leaderships in the liberal international order. My central thesis is that the Maghreb region is integral to the new Silk Road Grand Strategy. The partnership between China and North African countries help Beijing effectively manage and control its energy, goods, or product needs and open new markets and trade road. China has mainly successfully employed strategic partnerships or relationship as a prominent instrument in its limited diplomatic toolkit to guarantee integration between the local country's needs and the BRI vision. All Maghreb states are maritime economic strategically located between European advanced economics across the Mediterranean Sea to the north and high potential developing sub-Saharan Africa to the south. Geographical, given their location adjacent to the Mediterranean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean, Maghreb countries have historically been more oriented to European than other regions. Former colonial powers, France, Italy, and Spain see the North African country as strategic for economic, political, and security region. Nevertheless, since the beginning of the 21st century, the Maghreb has become a focus of the West. Considerable attention, especially at the security level due to the war against terrorism. China present in the Maghreb have also become evident, especially in energy, construction, and infrastructure projects. Since the Chinese President Xi Jinping announced in the BRI, the Maghreb countries have joined this initiative and signed memorandum of understanding and partnership agreement. As a result, China and North African countries' economic ties significantly change the region nature and balance of power of relations. Over the past years, China has gradually consolidated its economic presence in the Maghreb countries regarding trade, investment, and infrastructure projects. Beijing has become active in these countries, focusing on bilateral relations while also working in the form of China-Asia Cooperation, the Union of the Arab Maghreb, and the China-Arab State Cooperation Forum. The economic ties between China and the Maghreb countries have grown exponentially, especially went Algeria, proving the closest relationship. The trade between China and North African country grew to almost $24 billion last year. Its investment and contracts between 2013 and 2022 stood at $23.4 billion, when Algeria received the lion's share of $11.7 billion, as you can see in this table. Partnership diplomacy has become a primary foreign policy tool for China's grand strategic objective. Building strategic partnerships worldwide has become one of the Chinese diplomacy's most important business and instrument. The partnership diplomacy style established between Beijing and the Maghreb state indicate how the parties have upgraded their diplomatic, economic, and cultural relations, particularly since the BRI launch. China has established two strategic partnerships in the Maghreb region, when Morocco and Algeria, the latter has been on cooperative level. However, while China has signed an agreement when reset of the North countries, it has yet established a formal partnership in Tunisia, Libya, or Mauritania. Its growing presence in this country remains primarily economy. However, China role in the Maghreb is still developing, rooted chiefly in economic interests, cultural exchange, and diplomacy. China increased in ties when these countries center mainly on trade, infrastructure projects, port, shipping, financial cooperation, tourism, and manufacturing. China can be expected and to expand and deep this connection in this coming year, given the Maghreb strategic geographic location. Now I want to focus the most interesting part of China, the connectivity. The BRI target is the network of trade connectivity throughout Africa. This means connectivity among North African countries, the Mediterranean and Sub-Saharan. For instance, bringing Algeria as a gateway to Europe and Africa into China MSRI scheme will further increase China's shipping capabilities in the Mediterranean basin. The port of Al Madinah in Churchill may be vital for China's export goods to the Mediterranean northern shore. Morocco, strategic geographic location as a gateway to Europe, only 8 miles away from the continent, and its notable presence in the Sub-Saharan Africa, North Africa, and the Arab world would allow it to become a regional hub in China MSRI. For instance, Muhammad VI Tangier Tech City construction is one of the largest Chinese investment projects in the Maghreb. Tunisia occupies a hugely strategic geographic location at the crossroad between Europe, Africa, and the Middle East, thanks to its location in the center of North Africa, the middle of the Mediterranean region, close to vital shipping road between Europe and Africa continents. Tunisia serves as an ideal middleman to control passage between critical region for the MSRI. Mauritania is also critical to the MSRI, and it's grounded in position on the Atlantic coast and sub-Saharan Africa, where China aspires to expand its presence and influence at a geographical critical exchange point between North and Sub-Saharan Africa. The North African country geopolitical location on the Atlantic coast make it a critical juncture for the China MSRI. Energy security is also China key concern in the Maghreb region. Algeria, one of the world's largest production and exporters of energy. Nevertheless, its oil export to PRC remain small compared to its energy export to the European countries. Libya, an OPEC member, with a large crude reserves in Africa and an oil-rich country connected to the Mediterranean Sea and Sub-Saharan Africa. Thus, Algeria is significant oil and gas suppliers and one of the Chinese 15 crude oil suppliers. Although China is still deciding whether to take on a leadership role in the Maghreb region, its economic weight is slowly challenged out there traditional external actor strategic interests, mainly the US and Europe. China introduction multipolarity of the region provide local players with a new bargain tool in their relationship with the West countries. This will impact the regional balance of power and stability of the region with far-reaching implication for European interests in the long run. As North African countries use China to diversify their political and economic ties away from the West, this trend significantly impacts the EU and the US political leverage. China positions itself as indispensable partner of the Maghreb and viable alternative partner to the West, leading the North African country to expand their cooperation with PRC, not only on the economic and cultural matter, but also on diplomacy and defense issue. Moreover, given its geopolitical importance, Washington has a wide range of interests in the Maghreb region, spanning energy, religious extreme, immigration, and so. Does continue China's presence in an engagement when the North African country will jeopardize Western power projection capability across the Maghreb region and extensively across the continent. Now I want to show you my key finding. The Maghreb region is integral to the new Silk Road Grand strategy. China has mainly successfully employed strategic partnership or relationships as a prominent instrument in its limited diplomatic toolkit to guarantee integration between local country needs and the BRI vision. The Maghreb countries are welcome China's presence and showing eagerness to become involved in its ambitious BRI framework. The partnership diplomacy tool has provided China a platform to deepen and expand its cooperation with the Maghreb countries under the BRI Grand strategy. Chinese partnership with the Maghreb state broadly tend to correspond on three major categories of partnership: potential partnership with Tunisia, strategic partnership with Morocco, and comprehensive strategic partnership with Algeria. China interdependence level when these countries have increased in recent years, spanning many interests, for instance, energy security, trade cooperation, and infrastructure construction. The MSRI has targeted a key port in the Mediterranean Sea and bringing the Maghreb key port into the fold would further both Chinese shipping capability in the Mediterranean basin. The Maghreb region has developed into a central node in the Chinese maritime Silk Road strategy, connected by planned and efficient port, pipelines, railways, and power plants built and founded by Chinese companies and lenders. This Maghreb trade route help the PRC diversity its supply chains and create China, Indian Ocean, Africa, Mediterranean Sea blue economic passage to connect Africa to the new maritime economic corridors in Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Myanmar. For China, the opportunity to contribute and to exploit the Maghreb region potential as a trans-Mediterranean and trans-Saharan trade hubs through its infrastructure project and manufacturing localization is highly appealing primary goal of the BRI framework. China pursues bilateral agreement with individual Maghreb government based on shared interests rather than a common threat perspective. This allowed Beijing to avoid being bogged down in the Maghreb region when serve political commitment, as well in the case in pan-regional alliance structure, but to increase its room for maneuver and discretion to act more fairly. The successful implement of the BRI grand strategy in the Maghreb region challenged how the traditional external actors' strategic interests, mainly the US and Europe. The balance of global politics will certainly affect by China's Maghreb emerging partnership and the governance of interests. Introduction multipolarity in the Maghreb provide local players with a new bargaining tool in their relationships with the Western countries. This could impact the regional balance of power and stability of the region with far-reaching implication on European interests in the long run. It is unlikely that China wish to establish hegemony in the Maghreb region, but it would probably like to see the less West influence. It seems unlikely that China will soon replace European geopolitical power in the Maghreb. Nevertheless, as Washington disengaged from its traditional global leadership's role, Europe losing its vital security partner, this geopolitical development means that Western powers are losing their ability to influence the Mediterranean region's security dynamics. Overall, the Maghreb region's strategic location means that China's new Silk Road grand strategy will only continue to expand, especially in the economic sphere. Finally, there is connection between PRC emerging partnership with the North African countries and the new Silk Road grand strategy. Therefore, the key to understand China's upgrade involvement in the region must be in the context of the BRI framework. That's all. Thank you.
Time putting up your presentation on the screen, but it will be posted, I promise you, by tomorrow on our website, on the FPI website, North Africa Initiative, and it will be presented next to the video of this room. So it's my sincere apologies, but technically it's not working. So just bear with us, and we will be happy to send you a copy of the presentation tomorrow if you just send us an email, but you'll find it on the website. Lina, let me go to you for your 5-minute intervention, and then we'll move on to Tin Hinan, and then we'll open it up for more questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all the FPI colleagues for the invitation to join you today. I'm going to just make a few broad remarks and also maybe throw in a few questions for discussion if we have time to get to them. So first of all, I would like to congratulate our colleague for the publication of the book. It is very important to study with nuance China's presence in Africa, China's influence in Africa, and Maghreb countries specifically show us a bit more nuance in terms of learning more about China in the global south, China in Africa, and so on and so forth. And so taking a deep dive into the region and studying the nuance and the differences in the different cases is very welcome and extremely important. And so to just give a few comments, from listening to the presentation and from what I could gain out of the book, trying to read parts of it that were available to me to read and look at. So it seems we can talk about three general trends when we are discussing China-Maghreb relations, of course, in this contemporary moment, not going all the way back in history, as one can do. But it seems one of the trends we could talk about is that Maghreb countries are extremely important for China's foreign policy making and for China's influence on a number of levels, as we have heard from the presentation, in terms of energy cooperation, in terms of connectivity, specifically shipping capabilities, access to sea communication lines, as well as also important in terms of political and diplomatic standing, the comprehensive strategic partnerships, on the various other levels that were outlined to us in the presentation, kind of show that importance from the political diplomatic side. Also, historically speaking, thinking back to China-Algeria relations, for example, in the 1950s and 60s, and sort of that kind of the political enduring friendship, as I heard somebody say earlier before the panel even started. So this enduring friendship, really, we see it very well present in a number of China-Maghreb states' relations. The second trend that I want to highlight is that Maghreb countries also sit in this very special and exceptional position vis-a-vis China. And this position allows them to be countries that kind of cooperate with China on two fronts. One is obviously sort of the China-Africa platform, and we here can think about the Forum on China-Africa Relations, which Maghreb countries are part and parcel of, but also really China's kind of the West Asia part of the WANA, right? So West Asia and North Africa, sort of the Middle East, otherwise known as the sort of China's kind of foreign policy in the Middle East or in the region through the CASCAF, which is the China Arab State Forum. So Maghreb countries sit in this very interesting position where they can collaborate and cooperate with China based on this kind of China's policy and platforms for Africa, as well as for the Arab states and sort of the Middle East region. There is also an interesting part about the Maghreb countries that pose a bit of a challenge as well to China, precisely because China or Chinese companies, for example, are always in competition with a variety of actors when it comes to Maghreb countries. So, China's influence is challenged by companies and actors from Turkey, from Russia, from the European Union, from Gulf states, and so on and so forth. And so this is really also an interesting trend to kind of look at the extent to which China's influence is challenged by all of these external actors that are very much present in the Maghreb. The third trend, I would say, is kind of complementing the second one in saying that despite Maghreb countries sitting in this very interesting position, very intriguing position that can allow them to cooperate and to negotiate with China on a variety of levels, there still is a lot of potential, but has not necessarily actually been realized to the fullest extent. And here we can talk about the trade volume deficits, right? So we have seen from the presentation, and we know that China has become the largest trading partner of Maghreb countries. and it's been a number of years now. And sort of we saw sort of the table that tells us about China's investment and trades in the region and how they've been sort of increasing. So all of these are good signs, but then when we look at the trade deficits, that these are signs that look at the amount of potential that these countries can actually negotiate and realize in the relations with Beijing that has not necessarily been bankable so far. So whereas, you know, we heard earlier a bit about Tunisia, for example, with a strategic location that it can be playing, but at the same time, we know, for example, that Tunisia has not necessarily sort of banked on all the potential that exists there in terms of its relations with China. Same thing can be said about Algeria. Relations kind of seem to be really kind of more perhaps prominent on the discourse level, on the ideology side level, on sort of that solidarity. But when it comes to investments, when it comes to trade deficits, a lot can be done there to kind of, take advantage of this Belt and Road Initiative framework, or to the GSI, the GDI is what we are hearing about more recently. So with this in mind, I'll transfer it over to my colleague, Dr. Tinhinan Al-Kadi, to hear her remarks, and I'll stand by for questions if we have time for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Lina, very, very much. Let's go very quickly to Dr. Tinhinan, who is in London. And if we can keep the remarks a little bit shorter, so we'll have some time to get questions going.
Okay,
Please.
Thanks for the invitation, and I will do my best to keep it as possible. So thanks a lot for the presentation. I thought it was very interesting. I just have a few remarks on the content. I haven't yet read the book. I haven't yet had the opportunity to do so, but I'm looking forward to it. So first of all, I think it's important to situate the Maghreb in a broader scheme, potentially at like the Middle East and North Africa, for instance, or the rest of the African continent. The Maghreb is actually not such a significant economic actor when it comes to trade with China. So just raw numbers, for instance, the GCC, the Gulf, registers something around 170 billion US dollars of exchange of total trade volumes with China. Whereas the Maghreb, if you add even Egypt to it, which is an important economic partner to China in the region, we're counting in total something around 30 billion US dollars annually. So I'm combining all of all North African countries. So it's not such a significant economic relationship. However, it has been growing through years, and it has certainly taken a more strategic turn since the Belt and Road Initiative was announced. I think one important thing to mention, and I guess there wasn't enough time in the presentation, and Lina mentioned this briefly, is really the political capital that is at the foundation of China's relation with the Maghreb, especially with Algeria, and which kind of results today in the highest type of diplomatic relations China can have with a country, that is a strategic, comprehensive partnership. It has one with Algeria and another one with Egypt in North Africa. And so the relationship between China and North Africa can be traced back to the 1950s, where China actually played a significant role in the liberation movement of North African countries. And it has backed the FLN and built a strong friendship with Algeria since these times. When it comes to energy, I think it's also important to mention that North African countries and Maghreb countries are actually not significant exporters of energy to China. Libya was the most significant exporter of oil and gas of mainly crude oil to Beijing. But since the Arab Spring, since 2012, we've seen a significant drop in Libyan energy exports to Beijing, even though the numbers have picked up again recently. Most of Algeria's oil and gas goes to its southern European partners. However, since I think mainly China's 2016 Arab Initiative, we've seen some sort of qualitative turn in China's engagement with the region, because traditionally the economic relationship between Maghreb countries and China has reproduced patterns of unequal trade, whereby you had China mainly buying little kind of low value added products from North African countries in agriculture or like some energy products, whereby Maghreb countries importing finished manufactured goods from China. But this relationship is still very much present, but we've seen more interest from China in investing in kind of more strategic sectors, more manufacturing. In Morocco, for instance, there is this big project of building a smart city in Tanger, Tanger Tech City. And this is one of like the highlights and like the hallmarks of China's digital presence in the region. We've seen some major investments in the ICT sector. Huawei is an important actor in the region. It has built the bulk of the 3G infrastructure in all Maghreb countries and is very much likely to continue doing so with expanding 4G and 5G networks in the region. I think when it comes to the maritime Silk Road, our colleague was right to mention that it's a very strategic aspect of China's relations with the Maghreb. The Hamdaniya port is definitely one of the most important BRI projects in the Mediterranean. However, lately, due mainly to like political reasons, it has stalled. So I visited the site actually 6 months ago in Algeria. We don't see much on that front. Won't be long. I just want to say, maybe to conclude, that it's important to have nuance when we talk about China's engagement in the region. Obviously, China is a actor. We've seen a lot of tensions on the ground. I just came back from over a year of fieldwork between private Chinese firms in the region and there is often a mismatch. It's not one cohesive group. And it's important to see that China's engagement in the region is different from the one of Washington or the one like the European Union, because I would say that, and this actually came back during some of my interviews during fieldwork for my PhD, while like Washington has been viewing the region, Maghreb, as a main source of threat, and as like a key partner in the fight against terrorism and so on, China has been viewing the region as this economic opportunity. So for leaders in the region, it's a very different relationship whereby, China is very much seen as a partner for economic development in a way that, as it stands, other partners are not necessarily positioning themselves in a similar way. I'm going to stop here to leave enough space for the debate, but thank you so much for the presentation.
Thank you so very much. It's really interesting to me that the one key message that I think all three of you agreed on, and I happen to agree with it, is that the relationship of China to North Africa, or even to Africa in general, is quite different from the relationship or the view from Washington, at least. That for them, for Washington, it's an issue of terrorism, of dealing with threats, or even competition with China. In some way, it comes from a negative perspective, whereas China is engaging with the region based on opportunities that are shared interest. I'm going to forfeit my right to ask so many questions. So I'm going to open it for the room here to anybody who wants to ask a question. Okay, I will take 2 or 3 questions at a time, and then please go ahead, introduce yourself, please, first.
Okay, thanks for your presentations. My name is Sabina Henneberg. I'm from the Washington Institute for Near East Policy.
Yes.
I'm interested specifically in Tunisia. Just based on your research, how do you think the kind of mounting political instability in Tunisia will affect China's presence there?
Is it for a specific person or for the group?
For anyone.
Okay. Somebody here raised their hand? Yes.
Okay. Thank you for the presentation. I wanted to ask.
Introduce yourself, please, for our
yes,
speakers.
Sorry. My name is Eva Sojkova. I'm a visiting research fellow at SAIS. I'm doing research on China's influence in sub-Saharan Africa mostly. My question is about North African States Agency with connection to cooperation with China and the interplay in the domestic politics. Like, for instance, in sub-Saharan Africa, mainly in Angola, we can observe that the ruling elite is using the project in order to empower itself and remain in power. So I wanted to ask, is this also the case in North Africa? And what projects are being used in order to, the ruling elites to remain in power there?
Okay, let's go ahead and answer these two questions, and then we'll see how many other questions come up. Please, since the questions are not directed at a specific person, please, we'll just go quickly around for all speakers to contribute to answering this question. Dr. Mordechai, if you can start us off. The question of the instability in Tunisia, and your question is on
empowering ruling elites through the implementation of projects.
Okay, so please, Dr. Mordechai.
I hear all the first question. The second, I not hear it, but I think the political stable in Tunisia or in every North African countries, it's not unlikely that will influence the Chinese engagement in the country. You can see this in Libya, where is the civil war, and in Tunisia, the stable political. The Chinese came to do business. They do not care what is going in the country, but in the last years, because the economic situation in China, they are very careful about their investment. As I said in the presentation, if you see the investment in the Maghreb, they are very small. So there are no many risks for a Chinese investment. I think the investment in Tunisia in the last year was zero. Yeah, no, yes, no, yes, zero. Yeah, there are not investment in the 10 years. So I think one of the reasons, maybe, the political stability influenced the diplomatic relationship between the countries, but I think because the strategic location of Tunisia, as I said, the Chinese very want Tunisia to become more friend, and she has a potential to be a strategic partnership. But it's depend on the political stability in Tunisia. About the second question, I do not hear it, so I cannot answer.
The question basically involves how is China maybe empowering the political elite in these countries by its relationship. If we can be very brief, please, in the answer. Did you hear me?
Yes, but I don't know. I do not have an answer for this. I don't know.
All right, Lina, and if you can address these two questions, please.
Okay, thank you. So I'll start with the second one. And the question is, yes, whether Chinese investments in North Africa mirror something similar that we see some scholars and observers analyze about China's investments being used by ruling elites to basically stay in power or to direct Chinese investments to areas where some of the voter, basically base comes from. So that's kind of really interesting. It points at a very interesting and important perhaps distinction in some way, which is to say sort of the question that came from the floor talked specifically about Angola. Angola is a very interesting case because of the so-called Angola model. And we remember the Angola model for sort of this idea of swapping, right? So a country would have natural resources and it would engage in swapping those natural resources for strategic investments in infrastructure, right? So this swap natural resource for infrastructure has been observed in Angola and has been used sort of as a model to speak about similar situations. So perhaps one distinction between, for example, Algeria and Angola would be this idea that the swap model just does not necessarily exist, right? So what we have instead, when it comes to infrastructure cooperation with China, between Algeria and China, we have mostly the sort of Algerian government taking advantage of prices of energy, right? So the prices specifically oil prices going up and oil and gas prices going up in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, to basically contract Chinese companies to come and build a lot of infrastructure projects. That relationship is very different from sort of this swap, right? So energy for infrastructure swap. So it's kind of really interesting to talk about that, but it's also really interesting to maybe dig into the concept of agency a little bit and understand what agency really, what do we mean by agency? So is agency always something that's necessarily always good? Is it something that we should question? So this idea of elites kind of using and deploying investments for their own benefits, I mean, does that really count as agency? Is that part of sort of the definition of what agency is, or is that just sort of, individuals kind of benefiting for their own instead of sort of agency understood as sort of that contributing to the welfare of the public, the state, the people in general. So it's really interesting to kind of really ponder that a little bit. On the question of Tunisia, I don't have a lot more to add, but I'll say that it's kind of, as a political scientist, what's really interesting to me about the case of Tunisia is that there has been almost kind of a running thesis that somehow where countries, sort of China's investments tend to go or increase in areas that have political instability. So this argument has been kind of talked about in the context of several African countries to say places where there is political instability, you'll see Chinese companies interested in coming in with investments. And so the question, that Tunisia poses before us with this idea of zero kind of, investments in the last year really kind of puts a break to some of these kind of, big trends that can be observed on some, kind of really high level.
Maybe it's a sign that Tunisia is very stable.
Exactly, precisely. Right. So if we take that as face value, it would tell us that Tunisia is very stable when it's not in a sense. So yeah.
Lina, sorry to cut you off, but there is an interesting question that ties into the issue of Tunisia, so I'm going to throw it in, and it comes from a dear colleague, Amy Hawthorne from POMAD, which is the Project on Middle East Democracy here in DC. And she's asking specifically, do you believe that China has shown any specific interest in Tunisian ports, in particular the port of Raidis, I think. I don't know if, yeah. So can you add to that in your answer, and then maybe Tin can also incorporate it in her reply on Tunisia?
Okay, I have not necessarily come across much on investments in port and RADs. What I have been actually following was something a little bit different in China-Tunisia relations, which is related to actually a party school. So there's this project of building a political, sort of an elite training school that the Tunisian government entered into agreement with China to actually build the school, but also I've been following a little bit to see kind of what beyond just the construction of the physical building, what else is included in that sort of elite to elite kind of party to party ties between Tunisia and China. And I think it's a very interesting and growing kind of relationship. But let me transfer it over to Tin Hinan to tell us a little bit more about RADs and other things.
Thank you very much. Please, Tin Hinan, if you can jump in.
Thanks. So the question about Tunisia, well, it's an important one. I mean, so far what we know, because I mean things are changing quite fast in Tunisia at the moment. With the it's clearly taking an authoritarian turn. We can answer the question by comparing China's reactions to other popular movements and other significant political changes in other North African countries. And what we know recently in Algeria after the Hirak movement, the popular pro-democracy movement, we haven't seen significant, changes in China's presence in the country. So as long as Chinese economic interests are not directly impacted, I don't think that you will see any obviously interference from the Chinese side. The Chinese still hold on their non-interference policy, and so as long as business continues, really, I don't see much difference in China in Tunisia. Libya was an interesting case because when violence started in Libya, you had it was one of the first experiences of China having to handle, we're counting something around over 300,000 citizens who were at the time working in Libya. And there was this emergency in Chinese diplomacy where it had to protect its citizens and fly them to Beijing. But that's the very context to what's happening in Tunisia now. So short answer would be no. I wouldn't expect any significant change. And also Tunisia, in the grand scheme of things, is not very important for Beijing. This being said, regarding the Rats port, in the big picture, China is interested in ports in the southern shores of the Mediterranean. So all North African countries have preferential trade agreements with the EU. And then in the context of increasing trade and increasing sanctions against Chinese goods, there is a strategy to relocate some of Chinese manufacturing in North Africa and use these ports to be able to export towards European markets. Right, but so far the Rats port has not emerged as a significantly strategic. Definitely, the Chinese in the Mediterranean are focusing more on the Tanger port in Morocco and the Hamdaniya port in Algeria. Not yet been. The question very interesting, and I think it's a very important point when we talk about China's presence in North Africa, because we shouldn't portray it as just China imposing its will on these countries. These countries obviously have their own development strategy, own political strategy, and it's always a bargain and negotiation with China, and it has often, in some cases, been in place because Chinese firms come very competitive pricing when it comes to building infrastructure. And infrastructure building, we know, and there is large from the top, people in power. So in a way, I would say that in Algeria, at least, definitely something that has helped, the people in power. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tin. I'm going to throw a question here from me. I'm wondering the sustainability of the Maghreb-Sino relationship, especially when you take in consideration all the other competitors that are trying to compete for the region, whether it's the United States, whether it's also Russia. Where does that, how with Chinese interest in the region and in Africa in general, will be able to manage this kind of competitiveness that is, some of it is plain anti-China policies, not even necessarily because they want to invest in the region or because the region is historically important. I mean, Washington sees China as a competitor and a foe in many parts of the world, especially on the economic issues. And I wonder how that is going to affect the relationship with Washington. Any other questions we can throw in? Dan, you always have a great question or remark.
Not really, no.
Okay.
I-
Anybody else want to jump in? Please.
I actually have a couple questions. So the first one has to do with the lens that we look at the relationship between China and the Maghreb region. Is it better to, we kind of often assume it's kind of a state-to-state government relationship, but is there also a kind of a relationship between the private sectors that's interesting? And I'm wondered what our speakers have thought about that. And a kind of a follow-up to that, is there any sort of indication that China is working with informal forms of credit or investment, such as like local, I think I might be murdering this word, but like the Hawala system?
Yeah.
And do they interact at that informal level as well?
Please, let's start with then Hanan this time, since she was the last one to speak. Please, do you want to jump in and answer these two questions about the sustainability of Chinese relationship with the region, given the the big power competition that it is facing, especially from Washington? And then the second question is about the two things. One is is there any significant economic relationship between with the private sector in North Africa rather than the states? And the second question is about if the financing of these projects, and do they use an informal networks of finance or an informal network of I don't know, credit funding and so on, like the Hawala system?
Thanks
Please.
a lot. These great two questions. Okay, so the first question about the viability and sustainability of the relationship. I think, yeah, when you trace the relationship of the PRC Maghreb countries, the long relationship can be, again, like back to the early days of the PRC. So I think it's very much there to remain. Especially North African countries see Beijing as an alternative to the Washington country in a way, as an alternative when it comes to development paradigms, and considering the political situation in North Africa, the Chinese model is a very attractive model for most of the leaders across the region. So whether it's Sisi in Egypt or the current Tebboune in Algeria at the moment, the Chinese model, where you can combine economic development with authoritarianism, is an attractive model for the countries in place, without a doubt. And at the same time, that comes with funding for infrastructure that comes either from the China Development Bank or the China Exim Bank, which are like the two main Chinese financiers of development projects in the region. And China comes also with a lot of willingness, at least at the discursive level, to train people, to train officials, to train university students. You have lots of scholarships and partnerships for human capital building across the regions. And so this really strengthens the relationship and allows it to survive. And actually, China's development projects in the region, whether it's infrastructure building, whether it is training citizens and like bureaucrats or students, and so on, is not matched by any Western country. The EU has, but in recent years, it has disinvested in a way. And Washington is there. Like the US has some scholarship programs for students across the region, but we don't see the Americans being interested in building infrastructure in Tunisia or Morocco or elsewhere in the region. And so the Chinese have a huge comparative advantage in the sense that they are able to be present in these countries by providing the development in a way that the Americans or Europeans cannot. Regarding the private sector, yeah, it's a really good question. I think it's very important to what we mean. There's a lot of private. We have some independent entrepreneurs, especially from the south of China, coming to do private business in Morocco, so people opening restaurants or importing textiles, like kickstarting little garment factories in instance. When it comes also to North Africans going to southern China trade mainly, so there's well-reported work on Algerians, for instance, go and then to import and bring them back informally, to jump to the informality section, to bring them back in suitcases and sell them informally in the Algerian market. So we see a lot of these happening. It has slowed down since COVID, and especially that now many private North African entrepreneurs are not anymore.
Thank you very much. We still have about only 5 minutes before the end of the program, since a lot of our students are probably have other commitments. So Lena, if you can answer these two questions very quickly, and then as we started, we'll close off with Dr. Mordechai from Israel. Please, Lena.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so in trying to be conscious of the remaining time we have, I'll just maybe say a couple of remarks on this question of sustainability of Sino-Maghreb relations. I mean, it's, you know, a dose of competition is always good. And this is something that, you know, elites from across the African continent keep repeating, and they're very, you know, cognizant, so to speak, of the opportunities that some of these kind of, you know, thinking about this competition coming from the US or coming from Europe and so on and so forth can bring to them. So there's a way to look at this in terms of opportunities, in terms of potential, in terms of what this competition can bring to the market. And in this regard, it is China's real competition in the Maghreb, the way I see it. It's actually not coming from traditional players or from the US, but it's mainly coming from Turkish companies, right? So lots of Turkish companies have been observed to gain contracts that were originally given to Chinese companies, or there are some a variety of reconsidering, renegotiating, and rethinking infrastructure projects in the continent, and a lot of it comes, you know, we see Turkey and Turkish companies coming up as a real alternative, or as a more kind of concrete competition to Chinese companies. So Turkish companies, we also see Russia coming in sort of from this kind of security aspect. We also know, we see also about investments from the Gulf in terms of energy cooperation as well. But in terms of China's relations moving forward in the future in the continent, there are also other sorts of and sources of challenges. I was reading an article just today that was talking about how 2 years ago there were more PhD students who from Ghana who got their PhDs from Chinese universities than there were PhD students that same year who got their degrees from Ghanaian universities. But the problem was, the article was talking about today, was that when these students come back with Chinese degrees, when they come back to Ghana, they have been facing issues with employment, because their employers just still see, they have sort of this a way of just thinking about sort of a degree coming from a European university is somehow viewed as more credible than a degree coming from a Chinese university. So that really presents this kind of really moving forward, right? So yes, we have this human capital. Yes, we have this social capital. Yes, we have this capital. How can it translate moving forward to sort of really changing the livelihoods of these students who go on these scholarships to China? So these are questions that are going to be really important moving forward in the next 5 to 10 years. in terms of really translating that capital into tangible material changes. So yeah, I'll leave it here, and I'll be happy to carry on the conversation at other opportunities, hopefully.
Thank you. We look forward definitely to having you more often, you and Hanan as well. Dr. Mordechai, I hope you can really be concise in your reply. Let's say within 2 minutes if possible,
Okay.
so we can close the session.
Okay, I think in the future, the balance of global politics will affected by China's Maghreb relationships and the interest governance. But as I said in the presentation, it is unlikely that China will become hegemony in the region. And I do not think for now, this relationship will cause more trouble in the relationship between China and the Middle and the US. There are a lot of fields that will be more important for the Maghreb. As I said, the Maghreb is imported China only for economic and geographical for the BRI. And so I do not think that China is entered to the military field, so this relationship are not jeopardize the relations when the US. So if I conclude, I think that this was not a problem for US or the European for now, but in the future, if this partnership will become more and more important, this might could be a trouble for the West.
Thank you very much. These are big questions that I think we'll hear more of as the United States engages Africa and North Africa. As we've seen that with recent trips by senior US officials in the region, including the director of the CIA. But I think the lesson here for the US specifically is that to engage with the region is for the US to go back to its original approach to foreign policy in the 50s and 60s, where it invested in these countries and established relationships that are win-win for both, instead of approaching it from this negative perspective that it's always a security problem, it's always a potential disaster, and it's always a problem how we can get Russia out of it or get China out of it. I think this is, for me, is the great cleverness of the Chinese policy. And I think I agree with you, Dr. Mordechai, that yes, now it's just an economic issue, but I think like the United States started also as an economic power, just was interested in investment and so on. And it will turn into much more political and strategic relationship, especially as Lina also pointed out that the Chinese model is a very attractive model in North Africa and also in the Middle East. I've seen that among the monarchies of the Gulf, for example, who always saw China as a model where they can liberalize their economies, develop it, but without conceding power and political control. So China presents a very, very serious challenge to the United States. It's also, I think, North African countries are, let me put it very bluntly, it's sick and tired of their region being subcontracted to France, as the United States has done for many years, or to England. And these are colonial powers with a horrible histories in North Africa, even though the relationship is there, but there is still this popular resentment for this. The United States is now even subcontracting the region to countries in the Gulf who have interfered very blatantly in North Africa, something very new. And I think there is a resentment that's going on from the population there. Why are these guys coming over here to influence our politics, or I mean, in Libya and so on. Anyway, to conclude, I thank you all very much, especially our great students who are here, our guests, and the larger audience on Zoom. I apologize for the technical problems, and I hope you keep up with us. We're going to try to do other events on this region, and I think our next event, we're thinking about also exploring the Russian involvement in North Africa and Africa in general, which is a very focused interest of the United States foreign policy these days. So please, we look forward to having you next time. Thank you very, very much to our speakers. We'll have the video and the presentation tomorrow, fingers crossed, on our website. So please all look at it. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very
We have
much.
lunch here for those. This is why you missed coming here, because we have a great lunch here. So we're gonna grab our lunch.
Enjoy
And you
it.
guys have a nice evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.